Welcome into Mock Trial Masterclass, your guide to controlling the courtroom. I'm Luke and I want you to be a mock trial master. Let's talk about how you can make that happen. So there's a question that I've seen a lot of mock trial competitors ask, and it usually comes from those who are newer to mock trial. And the question is this: how can I write or prepare or deliver a great closing statement? And here's what I want to tell you. I'm really glad you're asking that question if you are indeed asking that question. That means that you want to succeed at mock trial, you want to win, and you want to prepare really well. But what I'm also going to tell you is it's not the best question to ask. And here's why. Because in mock trial and in real life trials, there's actually no such thing as a closing statement. There's such a thing as an opening statement, but there is no closing statement in trials. What you have instead is a closing argument, right? Because a statement simply states something, and an argument, well, is actually arguing something. And we're going to talk more about the difference in just a minute. So if you've been wondering about closing statements in mock trial, don't feel bad. Don't feel like, geez, I've already got this wrong. What else am I going to get wrong, right? You're probably new to this, and that's okay, right? We're going to get you to the point where you know exactly what you're doing, exactly how to perform on this. But it is important to know that closing statements aren't a thing, and to take that phrase out of your vocabulary and replace it with closing argument. So what I want to talk to you about in the rest of this video is why that distinction is important, why we need to be saying closing argument instead of closing statement. And then we're going to talk a little bit about how to give a great closing argument, because my guess is that that's really why you came to this video. Sound good? Let's hop in. So like I hinted at a second ago, when we talk about a statement, we're talking about stating something, right? Stating facts maybe. If I start saying, the sky is blue, it's warm outside, I had a turkey sandwich for lunch today. All of those things would be statements. Would I really be arguing with any of those things? No, I wouldn't really be arguing with any of those things. But what if the direction that I took those statements was this? The sky is blue, and here's why. If you go outside and you look up, I promise you're going to see that the sky is blue. And just like this light behind me is blue, it's the same color outside. Right? Now I'm starting to argue. Right? The sky is blue, that's a statement, but then I start adding all these details and start speaking persuasively and start giving you reasons why you need to agree with me. Now we're into the territory of an argument. Let's try it with that second statement I mentioned. It's hot outside. Right? If I just say, it's hot outside and stop there, that's just a statement. But what if I said, it's hot outside, and here's why. I mean, look at the temperature. Look at the temperature, right? It's 87 degrees outside. And I bet if you walk outside and you stand out there for a few minutes and maybe you start jogging or running around, you'll start to get hot, right? At that point, I'm arguing, right? I'm starting to give you reasons to believe that statement. I'm starting to persuade. I'm starting to argue. And that is exactly the difference in a mock trial context between a statement and an argument. And the only time as an attorney during a speech that we give a statement is at the beginning of a trial during opening statements. See, an opening statement is the part of a trial where we preview for the jury what to expect in the trial that's about to happen. We tell them the story of the case, either as a plaintiff or prosecution attorney talking about what the defendant did in our heads, and then as the defense talking about why our side of the story is that the defendant didn't do whatever they're being accused of. Right? We'll preview the trial by talking about the law. We'll talk about which witnesses are going to get called and what they're probably going to talk about. And we give the jury a preview of what we're going to ask them to do at the end of the trial, which is to either find the defendant guilty or liable, or find the defendant not guilty or not liable. All of those are accomplished in an opening statement where, again, we're just stating facts. If you listen to a great opening statement, what you're going to hear is a lot of phrases like, you will hear, we anticipate, right? This person will say this. You're going to learn this. By the end of the trial, this. All statements. So when we get to the end of a trial, what we get to do as attorneys is not give a closing statement. We're actually giving what is called a closing argument. And that's when, instead of giving a statement like we did at the beginning in opening statements, we're actually going to argue. We're going to start tying loose ends together, And instead of simply restating our opening in the past tense, right, where at the beginning we say you will hear, and then maybe at the end we just kind of change that and say you heard or you learned, we actually start to argue. In the same way that I was doing a second ago with the silly examples about it being hot outside and the sky being blue outside, we start to make a plea for our side of the case. We start to argue well. We start to tie some loose ends together. And as a closing attorney, if you're giving a closing argument, again, closing argument, not closing statement, there's really three things you should keep in mind as a closing attorney to give and deliver a really, really great closing argument. Let's talk about those. By the way, before we get into talking about 3 things that you need to write a great closing argument, I want to make sure you know about my book, Mock Trial Masterclass, which is available on Amazon. If you're new to mock trial and wanting to figure out what this whole thing is about or how to succeed at any individual element of a trial, like closing arguments, but also opening statements, cross-examination, direct examination, or objections, this is the book for you. I wrote it for you guys to have an easy to understand guide and plan to succeeding and excelling at every element of mock trial. There's chapters in here, like I said, about virtually every element of a trial. And if you want to pick up a copy, you can click the link in the description on YouTube or in the show notes on podcast platforms. So, to give a great closing argument, like I said, there's 3 things you really want to keep in mind. And the first of them is that you want to give the jury a reason to be interested in your speech. We've all sat through speeches, whether that was, a college lecture, maybe a sermon at church, that weren't very good, and as a result, we kind of struggled to listen to them, and we lost interest and we lost focus. Well, that's what you don't want to happen when you're giving a closing argument to a jury in a mock trial round. So it's really important to, right out of the gate, give the jury a reason to listen to you. Now, one of my favorite ways to do that is to tell the jury a story that relates back to your case theory and your case theme. I talk all about that in another video on my channel and break down really exactly how to do it. I'll leave a link to that video in the description to this one or in the show notes if you're listening on a podcast platform. But for now, you need to know that, again, you've got to give the jury a reason to listen to you at the beginning of your closing argument. If you don't and you just start launching into random facts and details about the case, chances are they won't be as focused as you wish they were, as you want them to be. So this is a great place to start. Again, tell a story, do something like I suggest in that other video, and give the jury a reason to listen. Second thing you need to do in a great closing is you need to apply the case that you're dealing with to the law surrounding the case. Every case in mock trial and in real life has law surrounding it, right? That's how a jury is able to decide whether the person is guilty or liable, or more specifically, whether the defendant is guilty or liable. So as you're giving your closing arguments, you need to take the law surrounding that case. Maybe there's 3 or 4 or 5 things that your side had to prove, and you need to apply those things to the case specifically. Go through those 3 things you had to prove and talk about how the case that the jury just watched proved those 3 things. And when you do that, when you follow that method, you will naturally start arguing as opposed to simply giving a closing statement, right? When you're applying the case to the law, when you're arguing, hey, this thing happened in the trial today, and that points to the fact that we proved this thing we were supposed to prove, or maybe if you're the defense, that the other side didn't prove whatever they were supposed to prove, at that point, you're arguing, and that's exactly what you want to do. Finally, for a great closing argument, you want to leave yourself room to be responsive to the trial that just happened. This is super important in mock trial because a lot of mock trial competitors want to be scripted. They want to memorize a script and simply recite that script when they give a speech. And there are times where that can work really, really well. But in closing argument, you've got to leave yourself room to be responsive because a lot of jury members are going to be paying attention and focusing and listening for whether you are responsive. I can't tell you how many mock trial rounds I've come out of where a jury member commented and said, man, such and such attorney, you did such a good job of responding to the case and bringing up things that actually happened over the course of the round. So for you to give a great closing argument, you've got to do just that. You've got to leave yourself room to be responsive to the trial that just happened. And as you're being responsive, again, make sure you're arguing. You're not just telling the jury, hey, remember when this thing happened earlier, or were you listening when this witness said that, and then stopping there. right? You're saying, hey, remember when this thing happened? Because that points to this. Because this thing happened, you can believe this. You can conclude this, right? You're arguing the whole time. Because remember, the biggest thing I want you to remember in all of this is that, again, we don't give closing statements in mock trial. We give closing arguments. And if you can remember to give your jury a reason to listen to you, to apply the case to the law, and to be responsive and argue as you're being responsive, you will give a great closing argument, and it will rise to the level of a mock trial master.